My name is Dr. Rhonda Smith. I like to be called Dr. Rhonda or Rhonda. I want to tell how I met Ross, who is a wonderful person. I don't have a speech made up, I'm just speaking from my heart. When I was going around searching for what was wrong with me, why was I always picking the wrong people? Why was I always falling in love with someone who didn't respect me, didn't love me, didn't give me the care that I wanted or even needed? I kept searching and searching, and when I would look on the internet, I found something called narcissists. So I thought, that's the problem. Something's wrong with them, not me. I need to get away from these people. And then the more I discovered that, I kept going to the same type of person, and I looked up something that said codependency. And I thought, codependency? I'm not codependent. I take care of myself. Well, I found out. You know, and working with Ross, I found out, and when I found his book on the internet called The Human Magnet Syndrome, Why We Love People That Hurt Us, oh my God, that was a big awakening for me because I was looking for that answer. And so I contacted Ross and I told him my story, and it's just divine intervention that we connected. Because what I found out with codependency is that we give love, respect, and care to people, and we don't get it back. And when we don't get it back, we still keep giving it. And if we don't give it back and that doesn't work, we get with someone else who do the same thing. I love that Ross named it love deficit disorder because that's what it is. If we loved ourselves, we wouldn't let anybody treat us like that. Amen. We wouldn't. So I just thank God and I thank Ross that I am love self-abundant now because through the grace of God and the vessel, I love myself. Nobody can ever disrespect me or not give me the love, respect, and care that I deserve. So I'm very happy, I'm free. It wasn't easy, and it's not easy. It's very difficult and it's hard, but it can be done. And what I love about Ross is that he tells you the steps of how to get there if you want to. So I'm going to introduce my friend, my mentor, and my new partner. We're going wide with this. This just started a date, and I'm happy that he did come here. Okay, Ross Rosenberg has been a I can't even talk. Ross wrote a book called The Human Magnet Syndrome, Why We Love People Who Hurt Us. Draws on his own codependency recovery and addiction, in addition to 28 years of experience in mental health, social services, and child welfare fields. Ross' work has been highlighted on various TV networks, including ABC, Fox News, WGN News. He participated in a recent ABU documentary about internet dating. His work has appeared regularly in Chicago, and weekly as a contributor to the Huffington Post, PsychCentral.com. I would like to welcome Ross Rosenberg.
There's actually an interesting story. Rhonda and I are both spiritual in our own ways, and I know I'm blessed, and all the time I just have to listen to it. And so things just kind of come to me at the right time. And so I was like, I was struggling with the idea that I get hundreds, and I'm not exaggerating, hundreds of requests a month for therapy. And people are desperate. I have a YouTube channel that has like 6 million views right now, and I don't know where to send these people because no one knows my methods. Because I kind of made these up through my own recovery, my own sad story of being married to, 3 times. I'm now married to my lovely, lovely, wonderful soulmate, Carell, and we've been together for 11 years. But my first 2 divorces were humiliating and horribly embarrassing because I'm this therapist and I can't get my act together. Everyone I fall in love with seems to be really harmful and narcissistic. So this material that I'm talking to you about today comes from my own story, my own motivation, my own willingness to fight against something that was inside of me that was working against me. And I didn't know what it was. And over the years of going to therapy and just not giving up, one step at a time, I put together one idea that led to another idea, that led to another idea, and led to another door opening, and miracles, and my efforts were paid off. And next thing you know, I had this story about people who are attracted to each other, and I had a reason. But back to Rhonda. So over the years, I put this together, and I created this book called The Human Magnet Syndrome, which was written almost 5 years ago. And I never thought, that's actually not completely true. I always thought that people would need to hear it. I never thought it would be so internationally big. I just needed a way to get people to know about it. And I never would have guessed in a million years that so many people, millions of people, are finding this material life-changing. Because when I was in school, I wanted to change the world. So fast forward, since this is not the Ross Rosenberg story, because I want to get to the material, I wrote the book. The book has opened up doors for me. I have been doing a lot of work. I then started to think about, well, my next step. I need to write about what to do. And I came up with the idea of the Codependency Cure. And I decided that was going to be my second book. And for many complicated reasons, I have not started writing my second book. I decided to develop the ideas, because the ideas are developing every day. During dinner last night, Rhonda gave me an idea, and I added it to the training. A week ago, I added an idea. So eventually, this material is going to be turned into a book, because it is my ambition to teach people what this is and what to do. And with all of these letters and emails and very sad stories, and I have not been able to do anything other than say, hey, listen, buy my book, look at my videos on YouTube, or go to my website, selfloverecovery.com, and you'll hear me mention that a few times, where I have all of my professional and self-help videos. Because if I cannot help the world, because I'm not taking on new clients, and I just can't. I'm working 7 days a week as it is. I have to figure out a way to get this information out to people so they can use this in their own lives, whether you're a therapist or just a regular person. Actually, that didn't sound right. Therapists are regular people also. That'd be too hard on them. So the Codependency Cure is the next step of the human magnet syndrome. And I'm still going to circle back to you. I'm just going to go this way. The human magnet syndrome, I will only be talking about very briefly today. That is all about why we, people who identify with the term codependency, and by the way, today I'm going to change that term. I'm going to take it away from you. But as caregivers, always fall in love with care needers. Why helping people fall in love with selfish people. Why codependents fall in love with narcissists. This is the next step in the evolution of the idea and a theoretical framework written so you don't have to be a therapist. Everything I do is written right in the middle so that both therapists and the general public can understand. So I thought, well, that's the best I can do, because I can't, and I'm hoping that therapists, people will take this material and say, hey, listen, you should read this book if you're going to a therapist, and you suggest to the therapist to read the book. By the way, if the therapist says no and snubs their nose at you, then that therapist, I think, has some issues. I think all therapists should be open to what their clients want and need. So then I had this idea. So what about having a certification program? And it was just this idea I had maybe, Rhonda, when did we first contact each other?
July, August.
Okay, well, 10 months ago, give or take, I had this idea, well, let me create a certification program where I will train people on how to be a therapist. And they have to be coaches, professional coaches, or psychotherapists. And I was like toying with this idea because I had this turmoil inside because I didn't know what to do with all these people I was turning away. I couldn't even answer the emails anymore because they were just one heartbreaking email after another. And then this idea, I was thinking, okay, well, I'm going to have this program. It's going to be long. It's going to be intense. It's probably going to be expensive, and I hope people can afford it because it's going to take a lot of time. And I'm having this idea, and then I get a call from Rhonda, who, I forgot exactly what you said, but it was you wanted to learn more about it. And that is when I said, well, I just have this new idea I had. I just thought of it a week ago. And that's how Rhonda and I met, was the intersection between the idea and the person needing something. And that's why I know there are no coincidences. So Rhonda has been trained, and boy, is she a student. And she has absorbed, I don't think I've ever had a student more into learning. So Rhonda is trained and supervised by me, and she's not a psychotherapist, but she is becoming a certified coach. But so if anyone is interested in help in getting to the next step, Rhonda's the person. Contact her, and we're going to get her very, very busy, and I am taking on one or two other people, but my wife would kill me just because I just said that. So let me begin by saying, for the longest time, I took the training wasn't even called the human magnet syndrome. It was called Why Codependents Are Attracted to Emotional Manipulators. There was this training company that wanted the term emotional manipulator. They did research. They said, well, we can sell a lot more trainings if we use the word emotional manipulator because everyone doesn't like emotional manipulators. It was, it was very business more clinical. And so they said, we will hire you to do your training, but we have to use the term emotional manipulators. So when you read my book, The Human Magnet Syndrome, this edition, I use the term emotional manipulator synonymously with narcissist. I don't use it anymore. You won't hear me say it. I just wanted to let you know, so if you wonder why there's a difference. So I did this training, and I, for 2 years, traveled all around the United States. I don't know, maybe 60, 65 cities, and eventually I wrote the book. And it was my effort to tell people what to do. Because you can't change yourself. You cannot get better. No matter how much you're suffering or how smart your therapist is, your counselor is, your best friend, if they don't know what it is. And the world has not known what codependency is. They have gotten it wrong. And these are very smart people who I have nothing but high self-esteem for. Nice to see you. Hi there. This is what I wanted to do with the human magnet syndrome, is I wanted to finally give people an idea of what is this thing that is making so many people's lives miserable. I'm not talking about 5% or 10% of our population. I'm talking about a huge percent. I'm going to guess 25. So everything that I do is explanatory. Definitions are important. I have a YouTube video, and I forgot the name of it, but it's something about if you can't see it in yourself, you can't see it in other people. If you don't know what you have in yourself, you can't get help for it. So Abraham Maslow, a famous psychotherapist and psychological theorist, came up to saying, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So you can go to a therapist who is the best, and I mean probably the best, but if they don't know what this codependency thing is, they're going to be helping you with something that will have no solution. The human magnet syndrome was what it is. The codependency cure is more of what to do. This will not be the type of experience where you will have this training and all of a sudden you will be better. This would be the beginning of a journey that you will, if you are a therapist, you will build on it, you will grow from it, you'll do your own work, because you can't be a good therapist if you haven't addressed your own self-love deficit disorder, or from now on, I call it SLDD. I haven't even gotten to the part of the training where I actually renamed codependency yet. So if you're a therapist, work on this stuff, because we know who here is in the mental health, helping, nursing, counseling field. Okay, there's no coincidence why we go into those fields. We, as children, learned early that our self-worth is helping people. And it's probably because we grew up with narcissistic parents. And I talk about that very deeply in my human magnet syndrome. So I will give you just a few minutes about the human magnet syndrome. Opposites attract, right? Magnets attract. Narcissists need a codependent, and a codependent need a narcissist. So the human magnet syndrome is, it takes this idea of codependency, which up until I wrote my book is just about a person with a lot of bad habits who keeps making the same mistakes over and over again. And it explains in detail that there's no coincidence. I decided that if people are going to get better, they have to have one simple explanation for codependency. Because I know, because I did this training for almost 2 years, and I had literally in the human magnet, the human magnet syndrome training, an hour of my training was just talking about what codependency is. And I had 8 or 10 slides. But I'm about to tell you the most simple definition that you will ever hear, and it's on your handout. And by the way, some of you, if you're as young as me, if you don't have your reading glasses, you'll need a magnifying glass. Oh, by the way, I've changed some slides. Like I said, I'm thinking all the time. After dinner with Rhonda, I actually changed some more slides. So if there's a slide that you want that's different, just shoot me an email. The email address is on the packet. So the human magnet, codependency is a psychological condition that manifests in relationships. It is when a codependent maintains a relationship with a person who is a narcissist. And a narcissist is a person who needs all the attention, all the love, all the respect, and all the caring in a relationship. They are like this magnet, this sponge, and they don't give it back. They don't reciprocate. So the codependent gives most of the love, if not all, the love, respect, and care in a relationship. And I call that LRC, in a relationship. And naturally, because of the human magnet syndrome, they always fall in love with narcissists. So they give all the LRC in a relationship. They want it to be reciprocated. They want it to be mutual. It's not. They try to make it mutual, whether by hoping or praying or controlling or arguing, and they never are able to, and they stay in the relationship. So the new definition, the simple definition of codependency, before I change the name on you, is a psychological condition that manifests in a relationship in which a person gives all or most of the love, respect, and care, hopes that it's reciprocated, hopes that it's mutual, and it's not. They try to get it back, and they don't. They're upset, and they stay in a relationship. That's it. That's my whole book on codependency. 2 paragraphs. So what I've done is I've taken this idea of codependency, which can be explained, well, they're people pleasers, they're sacrificing people, they're this and they're that, and I simplified it because no matter what type of codependent you are, that definition fits. And I remember By the way, I learn most from my mistakes. Oh my God, I am so blessed by having such a difficult life. And I am not joking. I'm not trying to be funny. I was not happy at the time. But I was born with, I have a gift, it's a blessing. I have always wanted to solve problems, and I keep trying and trying to figure things out. And so during my trainings, I get some of these very difficult questions. By the way, you still can ask questions, even though I'm just saying I can only take a few, or I might tell you a little bit later. So I didn't want to scare you. And I kept getting this question, I think I'm a narcissist. Or people would contact me and they would say, I'm a narcissist. And I wouldn't understand, because first of all, narcissists don't come to me and say, I think I'm a narcissist. They don't think they have a problem. It's everyone else. In fact, narcissists project their narcissism on everyone else. They see what they can't see in themselves. And at the same time, I was trying to reconcile my own family with my theories, because I didn't want to be an imposter or a cheater. There was a glitch in my theory, and it was in my own family. My sister is, and I can't believe I'm doing this on film, but she doesn't care about any of my work, and she'll never watch it. True story. Is always either marries or gets connected to narcissists. She's always in a relationship with a narcissist. But yet, she's dishonest, she's manipulative, she's deceitful, and she just pisses the hell out of me. I mean, just really gets me mad. I'm much better now. I don't get nearly as mad anymore, because I figured it out. And so I thought, well, she's a narcissist. I mean, she's a liar, she's a cheater, she's a manipulator. And then I kind of realized, well, that doesn't make sense, because she's married the narcissist. I'm an imposter. I was thinking, how could I have this theory and it doesn't fit in my own family? Then one day it hit me, there's two categories of codependence. There are passive codependents. And I know some of you guys are not old enough to remember All in the Family, but but Edith Bunker, she is the passive codependent. You know, she keeps it all inside. She tries to mollify or pacify everyone. She doesn't like to start any trouble, and that is the passive codependent. Passive, they play the martyr role, they're the salt of the earth. That's my Grandpa Chuck. Everyone loves the passive codependent. They're the ones that have funerals that have like miles and miles of people standing in line, because they're just wonderful people. So we think. But are you really wonderful if you live your whole life and you've never experienced self-love? And then you have the active codependent, the one who's manipulative, the one who's controlling, the one who can engage in power and control struggles, the one who will argue, the one who will get into fights, the one that will take someone's cell phone and look at their cell phone records and put software on their husband or their wife's computer to catch them in their affairs, who's always measuring the alcohol or always trying to catch them. And they also could be the ones that have an affair because they want to punish the husband who's always having an affair. So they're not narcissistic. They're just very controlling. So if we look at the definition, what makes the active codependent and the passive codependent the same is they're in relationships with narcissists and they give all the LRC, they don't get any, and they stay. One is just very aggressive and sometimes not very nice, and one is the salt of the earth. So now we have this understanding that if you know someone or you are that way, you still can be a pain in the ass and not be this wonderful, lovable person and be codependent. Any questions on that idea? So that helped so many people come to terms with this disorder that they were thinking that they were narcissistic. And then I had to come to terms with this other phenomenon, and this happened when I was I had a client who was a psychotherapist, and she had this life story of falling in love with these really horribly abusive, neglectful manipulative men, and she says, you know, I'm not codependent anymore. I have not been in a relationship for 5 or 6 years. I have not had any intimate relations with a man, and it wasn't because of a spiritual religious belief. And she goes, I don't think I'm a codependent. What she had done was to control this out of control phenomenon, she turned it off. I call that codependency anorexia or SLD anorexia. She hit her bottom, and the pain and the suffering was so bad, she didn't know about the human magnet syndrome. She just knew that every man that she ever fell in love with, she was a magnet for disaster. It's a survival and protective mechanism that allows this SLD, someone with self-love deficit disorder or self-love deficient, to not suffer anymore from these relationships. But what it does is it disassociates them from the very human experience of intimacy. Emotional, relational, and physical intimacy. And the more that I talk about it, the more I find that there's a lot more people who fit this category, who just say, I'm done, I'm fine, and they pretend that everything is well, but it's not. Because this type of anorexia, this type of starving, will cause mental health problems. Because we humans, we are designed, we have evolved, we have become who we are because we need love and connection. And when you deprive ourselves from it, it hurts us. So in my process of sorting through this codependency thing, and by the way, this stuff is not in the human magnet syndrome, this version. I came up with this other idea, is that personality is not connected to narcissism or SLDD, or codependency. How many here know of a sociopath that, or a covert narcissist that can be really sweet on the outside and a total beep? I don't know what the rating level here for, so I'm going to keep it at rated G and PG for now. Then I might lose control and swear a little bit. But just a total jerk on the inside. We call those covert narcissists or sociopaths. But everyone sees them as sweet. How many people know codependents who are kind of angry and manipulative and always kind of lying and trying to get everyone to give them what they want, but they come from this background where, I mean, their background made their personality. They lie and manipulate, but yet they're codependent. So personality type is not connected to either SLDD or codependency or narcissism. A codependent and a narcissist can be selfish. A codependent and a narcissist can be shy. They're independent variables. Codependent and narcissist can be gregarious. A codependent and narcissist can be an addict. A codependent and narcissist can be lie. So let's get rid of this idea that these codependents are just by nature of all their sacrifice are these wonderful people. Some of us also have issues that we need to talk about. And that is why, and I've been saying this forever, I am so proud of my work in the development of codependency, narcissism, and SLDD, but it is not an all-inclusive theory. It doesn't explain everything. Everything else and about mental health, mental illness, psychological background, that all gets fit in. I am not one of these people who say, just read my book and it'll be the last book that you ever read. And buy 10 of them and they're on sale. Buy 2, get 3, whatever. Actually, that would be bad business. But no, I am here to talk about one element of mental health that has to do with why we fall in love with narcissists. And it's not as simple as you think. If you want to have this large explanation, I'm offering you a simple explanation that is a little bit more deep than most people talk about. The most asked question I have, and I promise you at least 5 of you want to ask this question: can a codependent be a narcissist? No, it's not possible. And I explain this in my book, The Human Magnet Syndrome. It's just not possible. And I have a video on it on my YouTube channel. If you just go YouTube, if you Google YouTube and Ross Rosenberg, you'll get to it. They just can't be. The reason some codependents feel like they're narcissists is because they're gaslit. I have a whole 6-hour, I have trainings on almost everything I talk about, and they're for professionals and for the general population. And so there's a lot of things that I can't talk about today because we'd be here for 20 hours. But the whole phenomenon on gaslighting is huge in the understanding of codependency and narcissism. But if you have been gaslighted to think that whenever you ask for something, you're selfish, or when you want someone to do something for yourself, you're needy, or and someone tells you you're narcissist, that you start to believe it. So it's not possible. And by the way, more often than not, when someone asks me, I think I'm a narcissist, it's almost evidence that they're not. Because how many here know a narcissist? Have any of these narcissists ever said to you, I think I'm a narcissist? No. Have any of them said, I think you're a narcissist? Yeah. So this word codependency, it just annoyed the crap out of me because, one, is in clinical circles, when you're around a lot of people who are just into diagnosis, ICD-10, the DSM-5, it's like codependency not only is a made-up word to them, but it means nothing, because it is a word that's overused, misused, misunderstood, overgeneralized. It originated out of the idea that it's the partner of the person who is an alcoholic. That's where it started. And it's been expanded and expanded and expanded, so much so that no one takes it really seriously, unfortunately. It's shaming. Our clients, if someone says, yeah, I'm codependent, well, I mean, it's like, yeah, I have eczema, or I have, something that is a problem, but you don't want to tell people. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with eczema, and you shouldn't be embarrassed about it. But I just wanted to try to give an example. In fact, I think codependency is much worse than that. So I say, goodbye, codependency. It's been nice knowing you. It's time to come up with a new word. And self-love deficit disorder, I had been hoping to come up with a word. And I couldn't think of it, and one day it hit me. I literally almost fell out of my chair. It hit me one day. Self-love deficit disorder. It was the condition that every codependent experienced. Because if you have, as Rhonda said, if you have self-love, self-respect, and you care for yourself, there's no way in hell that you're going to stay in a relationship with a man or woman who treats you like crap. So it's neither stigmatizing or shaming. It redefines it all in very logical ways. It is nothing but a name for symptoms. So I will tell you, self-love deficit disorder is a great name, but in itself, it's not the problem. And we're going to learn why today. It explains why people who do not love themselves find themselves trapped in these relationships and can be miserable, and sadly, like my mom, and God rest her soul, died a broken codependent. Her last couple weeks in this world, in this earth, she was giving away, we would come to visit her, she was looking at carpet samples to make sure the house was nice for my dad before she died. She was giving away food, she was asking how we were doing, and she was, and my fiance and I even wanted to get married so she could, and this was, and I'm so mad I listened to her. We wanted to get married and bring a justice of the peace into the hospital, and she said no, because she didn't want to take that away from us. So it reconceptualizes it as a problem that originates from attachment trauma. And we're going to talk more about that. And as it's described in the human magnet syndrome, attachment trauma is the experience of being raised by a parent who has narcissistic personality disorder, or what I call pathological narcissism, which means if you have a two-parent family, then it's very likely that one of your parents is a codependent. And you were raised in an environment where the only love that you got was the love that made your narcissistic parent feel good about themselves. If you were the pretty girl, the handsome man, handsome boy, the smart kid, the kid who got out of trouble, the kid who watched or took care of all the other children, the one that got good grades, that type of experience is very, very traumatic. And we're going to talk more about that today. So there's attachment trauma, core shame, loneliness, and addiction. And then we have self-love deficit disorder. So even the name that I created doesn't tell you the problem. It tells you the outcome. And we're going to talk more about this. So let me quickly explain to you what a pathological narcissist is. They're one of 3 personality disorders: narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and they're known as sociopaths, or someone who is in an active addiction. You can be a person who is an SLD or a codependent and be addicted to cocaine, heroin, or alcohol and behave completely narcissistic. The drug itself creates the narcissism. But if you go into recovery and you find a way to rebuild yourself, then we find out if you really are either on the codependent side or the narcissistic side. And this is my favorite diagram of narcissists. Everything is around them. The world, the universe revolves around them. So codependency was never the problem. It was always a conglomeration of symptoms, a disorder that was actually unclassifiable. It could never have been in any of the text or diagnostic texts that we use, because it was so broad that it just couldn't be classified. For example, if someone has major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, there are certain symptoms that you have to have that allows a person like me to diagnose you. You can't do that with codependency, according to what we know about it. It's so broad. Who here has heard of the Rorschach ink blot test? It's a test that some old-time therapists give, and it's just a bunch of ink blots. And you're supposed to tell the person what you see. And everyone sees something differently. And what you see is based upon your psychological background. And the psychologist is supposed to interpret that. Well, that's what codependency has become. It's what someone believes it is in their background. It was never the problem. Attachment trauma. It's during your formative years, you were raised, neglected, abused, deprived, creates core shame, creates pathological loneliness, creates addiction, and creates the disorder. We understand that, then we understand why you or someone you work with or love has become or is an SLD. So I love to create diagrams. I love to create tools to simplify things. So I created what I call the self-love deficit disorder pyramid. And you're welcome to use this. Just email me, and I'll send you the full graphic. But it explains exactly what SLDD is. It's right on the top. It's a symptom. Attachment trauma, the condition of childhood attachment neglect, abuse, or deprivation. It is a disassociated childhood where you have so much emotional pain, you have to remove yourself from your feelings. Otherwise, you won't survive. By the way, I have to warn you, my trainings are always really upsetting. and you are in a safe place if this gets to you and it makes you feel sad, it brings up memories, you feel like you want to cry. I'm telling you, I've been doing this for years, and it's why I have a retreat, and I'll talk more about that later. So you're in a safe place, and I want to let you know that this happens to most people. So attachment trauma is a dissociated childhood where you're trying to survive only being loved by how you make someone else feel good. Core shame, which is being fundamentally bad or flawed. It is a person who's only as good as what they do, and they're not good for who they are. That's core shame. Attachment trauma creates core shame. Everything that I do connects everything. From core shame comes pathological loneliness, deep, aching, lonely pain that every person who's in SLD feels before a relationship, after a relationship, or sometimes in the relationship. The relationship itself is the drug, the medication that takes away the loneliness. But it is excruciating feelings of worthlessness, emptiness, and loneliness. It's an existential void. From the loneliness, you have to figure out a way to get rid of that pain. And I know this because for me to figure this out, I figured it out in my own life. And how do you get rid of loneliness is you're in a relationship. And who are you going to pick? Well, the human magnet syndrome says you're always going to pick the narcissist because he's going to be charming. He's going to be that bad boy, that bad girl, that one that just is exciting. And so the loneliness is put at bay by trying to get rid of it, and that is the relationship. And I call that SLDD addiction, which is the I can't even read it. It is the narcissist compulsion. I actually redid the pyramid, and that it is a compulsion to narcissist, where that loneliness ache, the withdrawals, and we're going to talk about it later, subsides when you are in a relationship. It is an addiction, and we're going to talk about it. From the addiction, the need to stay in this relationship is codependency, is self-love deficit disorder. It is a selfless, compulsive caretaker who habitually attempts to control others into loving them. So if you're in therapy, you will be in therapy your whole life if all you do is work at the top of the pyramid. You cannot solve SLDD unless you go all the way to the bottom. Not all therapists know how to do trauma therapy. Some do. Not all therapists understand this, and that's why more and more people are learning this. The more I give these trainings, the more I educate people. Any questions about the pyramid? Okay, if you can, I'll take 3 questions and raise your hand. You're the third one, first, second, and third. Yes?
So to get down to the bottom of trauma, is that both cognitive and in the body, or is it one or the other?
We're going to talk about that later in the training. Absolutely. So the question was, how do you get to that? We'll talk about that later. So I'm not second question?
Yeah, I was just really identifying with that pathological loneliness.
Okay, and we're going to talk about pathological loneliness later. By the way, I design my trainings like I do everything. Everything is connected. I do introductions. I go deeper, deeper, and deeper. So a lot of times when people have questions, it's because I haven't yet gotten to it. So we're going to get to that in depth.
Will all of this be supported and reinforced in the certification by Rhonda?
If you work with Rhonda has mastered these concepts, and she will be supervised by me, and anyone that works for me. I run a counseling center, and I have very high standards for my psychotherapists, and I supervise every one of my psychotherapists, and every one of the people who work. So absolutely, you can't be certified if you don't know this stuff. So let's talk about the first level, attachment trauma. It is an unconscious experience that most of us cannot get to by ourselves. It manifests, it's manifested by the shame, the loneliness, the addiction. If you just follow the trail, you are going to always get down to attachment trauma. The challenge is most therapists, and this is not anything bad I'm saying about therapists, are not trained to actually work with unconscious, disassociated trauma. But that's where it starts. So shame is a second level manifestation of trauma, loneliness third level, the addiction fourth level. So SLDD is what I call walking attachment trauma. We all are carrying this in ourselves, and many of us, if they haven't been in therapy, don't know it. And it is that trauma that is the heart and soul of what creates the human magnet syndrome. First of all, let me explain what I call the subjective nature of trauma. And I learned this early on. I used to work in foster care. And at the time, I was supervising some therapists. And there was these two girls who were in a foster home. And one girl was sexually abused by her father for about 5 years. And the father absolutely, and this is very sick, by the way, very sick. He absolutely adored this little girl. He bought her treats, candies. He did everything. He just treated her like she was his little angel and horribly, horribly traumatized her through incest. Her older sister, he hated. He thought she was mean and nasty. He swore at her. He hit her. He didn't always feed her. And he then threatened that he would kill her if the older sister ever went to mom to tell about the sexual abuse. The older sister had much more serious psychological problems than the younger sister. And that is when I learned this idea that trauma is subjective. It's all relative. Of course, sexual abuse, incest is horribly traumatic and horribly psychological harming. But the older daughter's experience was more traumatic. So it just throws a wrench in our ideas that it's not what happened, it's the experience of the trauma. You can have a narcissistic mother, an absent father, or a codependent father, and have a grandma who's just sweet and loving and there for you all the time. There are certain things that make trauma look different in different people. And so I don't want to jump to the conclusion that everyone's trauma is the same. To understand trauma, we have to understand it literally is a medical condition. All this psychological stuff can be explained in simple medical language. Trauma, which is sometimes known, serious trauma, is known as post-traumatic stress disorder. When we undergo a traumatic situation that is just too big for our mind to handle, and everyone has a different level of resiliency. Everyone has a different personality. Some people can handle trauma differently. You can be in the war and have two of your best friends die in front of you. Actually, there's two guys, and your best friend dies in front of you. One person will have severe psychological problems and one won't. The difference is their psychological background and their levels of resiliency. When trauma happens and it's just too big to handle, whether you're raped, whether it's incest, whether it's attachment trauma, the brain recognizes it, it packages it up and seals it in a little container, and it puts it into the part of your brain within an area called the limbic system, but specifically in a part of the brain that's called the amygdala. It is where your trauma memories are stored. And that part of the brain is not connected to the thinking part of your brain where you can remember things. That is why when people disassociate from their trauma, repress their trauma, they can't remember it. It's literally in a different part of the brain, and the brain does it on purpose because it thinks that's how it's going to survive. But anyone who is a trauma survivor, that trauma that they can't remember infects them their whole life. It plays out whether in their relationships, in drinking problems, in personality issues, in relationship issues. They might not remember it, but it's there. So trauma, attachment trauma, the one that most of my clients in the beginning can't think about, can't remember, it's in here. And evolution is not perfect. And it might save us from pain, but it also keeps us locked in because there's no mechanism in our brain that knows exactly when to bring the trauma back. No mechanism. Self-love deficit disorder contributes to attachment trauma. So, the codependent parent, and now this is one of the things that most people don't want to hear, but it is so true. You can't get better if you don't know your problem. And a lot of people will tell you that codependency are these poor, helpless people who are always giving and loving, and they're innocent victims. And if they just could get people to do the right thing, then everything would be perfect. We are responsible for our codependency. It's not our fault that we are victims of attachment trauma. We bear no responsibility. But we are adults, and once you're an adult, you take on the responsibility, and you can't blame your parents for how you harm your children. If that was the case, we would let everyone out of prison. Everyone. Because everyone has a story that can usually be traced back to their parents. The SLD parent has to understand to stop the cycle that they are participating. That's why I created the human magnet syndrome. I said you can't get better until you understand that you are part of this problem. You are falling in love with that person. No one is forcing you or kidnapping you. So the SLD parent is over-functioning because they're taking care of this narcissist, or they're taking care of everything, working 3 jobs while the narcissist is not working. They're tired, they're vacant, their emotional resources are depleted. They're terrified of pathological loneliness. They're trying to keep everyone safe, but they never can because you can never stay in front of the narcissist. So even though that SLDs, if you identify, are empathetic, we can love, we can care for people, but if we are living in this world where we're just trying to put out fires all the time, and as much as we love our children, and SLDs love very deeply, because they can do that, not so much the narcissist, the children get neglected. Now, the children, when they're in therapy, will remember, my mom, will say the mom is a narcissist and the dad's the SLD. They'll go, my mom was a saint and my dad was just horrible. And when I have this session and I try to get them to understand what I'm doing with this slide, that their mom, that the codependent parent is responsible also. You cannot get to your own SLDD, your own codependency, if you're going to excuse your parent. You can't solve something if you're going to explain it away. So it's a very important step in SLDD recovery to come to terms with both parents are at fault. Because I never try to turn people against their parents. I just try to get people to understand what happened to them. And forgiveness is wonderful. Everyone has the capability and the choice to forgive someone. But forgiveness is not ignoring something or giving someone a get out of jail free card. So the parent who is afraid of loneliness, convinces hopelessness, makes promises that they never act upon, uses children for emotional support, they're the better parent, for sure, but they're also responsible. My son, despite everything that I tried to do for him, is probably on the codependent side, the SLD side. I share responsibility. I married his mom. So I say this not to make anyone feel guilty, but to understand that there's work to do, and the best thing we can do for our kids, no matter how old they are, whether they're 8 or they're 48, we are the role models. And the best thing we can do for our older children, our adult children, is just to affirm what we didn't do or what we did. And to ask for forgiveness. Because that in itself is so healing. To actually say to the person that, hey, I did my best, but I didn't do well enough. And I learned about this SLDD thing, and I'm not going to blame your dad or your mom anymore. I share this. It's a really, you can't imagine how validating that is for a child who is an SLDD. Because the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. It depends on what tree that apple falls on. And your child or your children is going to be either on, and I talk about this in the human magnet syndrome, I have the continuum of self-theory. It's too big for me to talk about it. They're going to fall on one side or the other. The continuum of trauma is an important concept that I created. When you get into medical circles and psychological circles, trauma is post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think that's unfair and that's not accurate to think of trauma as being this disorder that is only considered trauma when it rises to the point of it's so severe you've not only repressed and disassociated from it, you don't remember. As we talked about, trauma has a very distinct medical explanation. All trauma has impact. Whether it is the day you find out that there's no tooth fairy, or you see mommy putting presents under the Christmas tree and she's not Santa Claus, or something bad happens to you. The brain has a circuit breaker. We know that, like in our houses, if two people are using a hairdryer and then someone's running the microwave, the circuit breaker might go off because there's too much energy going on, and instead of the house blowing up or catching fire, the circuit breaker turns it off. Well, the brain has that circuit breaker, and when the trauma gets too severe, it packages it up and relegates it to our limbic system. And that is what we call disassociation or repression. Profound trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, or complex trauma is almost always disassociated. So what accounts for mild trauma is trauma that can be processed, talked about, discussed, and then it's released. The best thing you can do for someone who is a trauma survivor is give them time, and when they're ready, is ask them to talk to you about it so that they can talk about it and then they can just let it go. It's not pushed in the back of their head. So I use this continuum, and I have this story that I'm perfecting. Every time I say it, I'm getting a little bit better at it. So this is the 4th time I say it. I'm going to use an example of a little girl going to Disney World. And she has been dreaming of meeting Cinderella her whole life, or Ariel. I mean, I'm so old. I'm going Cinderella. Who's the newest little girl dream woman? Is it the Frozen girl? What's her name? Okay, Princess Elsa. Okay, Princess Elsa. So, and of course, Princess Elsa is real because she's a 5-year-old, and we don't want to upset our 5-year-old. We give her those fantasies because that's what makes children so darn cute. Trauma that happens while feeling safe and you are able to talk about it, process it, and release it, is just the bad stuff that happens. So little Sally, we'll call her Sally, goes with her parents to Disney World, and Elsa, is that her name? And sees Elsa, and she goes, Elsa, and she runs up to Elsa, and Elsa goes, kid, don't touch the dress, you know. But Elsa, can I have a hug? No, kid, don't touch the dress. It's okay. How are you? And she won't let the little girl close to her. And she just had this idea that she was going to hug Elsa, and Elsa was going to be like in Frozen. And all of a sudden, Elsa is this person that doesn't want her to touch her dress and get too close. But she's being professional. She's a teenager who's a paid actress to wear a dress in a very hot 90-degree weather, so she's not having a good day. And you know, after the 800th kid wanting to hug her, she just says enough. So this kid starts to cry and goes, Mommy, Elsa was mean to me, or Daddy, or both. And the parent goes, you're right. Elsa was having a bad day. And the parent makes up some really good excuse about Frozen, because they saw Frozen too. Just like I saw, my son saw Toy Story, he's 24, about maybe 250 times. And I couldn't help but remembering it just because it was always in the background. So parents can go with it. And she cries, and you know, and then it's like, she probably won't even remember that much this story, because the parents were there, they let her experience it, and it was gone. So now let's go another Elsa story. Trauma while feeling moderately safe, defense mechanisms are needed, and it's able to be processed and released. Girl sees Elsa, comes running up to Elsa, 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 and Elsa pushes the kid away and says, stop it, kid, you're being a brat, and scowls at her. And she's just a little bit of a push, you know, and she's looking mean. And this kid just starts bursting in tears, goes up to Mommy and Daddy and says, Mommy, Elsa was mean. She pushed me away from her. I mean, that's pretty traumatic for a 5-year-old. And by the way, I think illegal too. I'd be pretty pissed off if I was a parent. And so the parent, they're somewhat annoyed, but they're able to say it happened. They don't really do anything about it. They give their daughter a little hug. It's okay, don't worry about it. She's having a bad day. But it was addressed, but the little girl needed a way to deal with this because no one took all the pain away. So that's what I call moderate to mild trauma. It was trauma that someone was moderately safe. This little girl needed a way to process this and ignore it, to pretend it didn't happen, and then the parents actually gave her the opportunity to talk about it. Scene 3 with Elsa. Elsa has been drinking a little bit, and little Sally comes running up to her, and Elsa is drunk, and she kind of pushes the kid away and calls the kid a stupid bleeping brat, and said, kids like you should be spanked. And this kid is just mortified, like stunned. She goes back to her parents, who, in stage 3, virtually no, oops, it's a new touch screen. I didn't know. Goes back to her parents, who don't really support her. Says, well, you know what? She was having a hard day, and plus sometimes you're kind of annoying. And just, it's okay. We're going to go see Sleeping Beauty, and she's sleeping, and everything will be fine. So the trauma was more severe. The child felt unsafe and was not protected. So now the defense mechanism has to be higher. It's like suppression. I have to, I'm not going to remember this happened. I'm not going to talk about this, because when I talk about it, I feel worse. So now we have just what I would call trauma. You know? Now, number 4. This is what I call PTSD trauma. Elsa's drunk. She pushes the kid, she falls back and bumps her head. And has a little bump, and scrapes her knee. Her parents yell at her for harassing Elsa. So she's not safe because she was hurt. She's not safe, and the people that are supposed to protect her blame her, and she doesn't have anywhere what to do with this trauma. It's too big for this little girl to handle, so she just, like, it goes away. And she'll never talk about it, and she won't remember what happened on that day because it was just too big. And then the worst type of trauma is complex PTSD, trauma that's deeply repressed. This is the same girl who was hurt and injured by Elsa and didn't get any help. And then 5 years later, as a 14-year-old, a boy rapes her, date rape. And that is another trauma that falls on trauma, that builds on trauma, and then we have more psychological issues. The reason this idea is important, because trauma is relative, and it's just not trauma when it's PTSD. Trauma that can be talked about is what we can do in psychotherapy. Trauma that can't be, we need trauma specialists. 2 questions. Any questions for the trauma bit? Attachment trauma rises to the level of PTSD. You can't remember it, and it's hard to get to the emotional memories. So moving forward, so we have the pyramid that explains what SLDD is. Core shame is the next level. Trauma creates core shame. I am a bad person because I am a bad person. It's who I am. Shame is not guilt. Guilt is feeling horrible for what you do. Shame is feeling horrible for who you are. And these pictures match up to a child memory. The man was once the little boy who was hurt. The woman was once the little girl who was hurt. SLD and shame, core shame. The human doing is the shame part. You're only as good as what you do. Shame is the outer skin of attachment trauma. We can't really get to attachment trauma because it's kind of pushed away in our back mind. But we can get to the shame part, some of it. It is feeling fundamentally damaged. It is the antithesis. It is the opposite of self-love. It stays with us because of the way we think, our cognitive distortions, the way we manipulate our own thinking to make ourselves believe something that's not true. Because we were not born broken, bad people. Every child is born perfect. They are born with nothing but possibility. They're not born a bad person. They have to be traumatized to feel like they're bad. So if we are going to solve SLDD, we have to get to the shame, which is much easier to get to in psychotherapy. Shame feeds on itself. What I mean is, shame creates shame. It is what I call a double bind. If you feel fundamentally broken, you feel fundamentally inept, fundamentally unworthy of love, you act in a way that brings it upon you. That is a self-fulfilling prophecy. You believe no one will love you, you act a certain way, and then only the people that love you are the narcissists. And you prove to yourself what you most don't want to be, the self-fulfilling prophecy. 2 days ago, I came up with this idea, so this is brand new, and you don't have this in your slide. You have this, but I changed it completely. That's how rapidly my ideas change. So there are 2 levels of shame. Shame, okay, attachment trauma is conscious and unconscious. Attachment trauma is unconscious, you can't remember it. Shame is, there's part of it that's conscious, just like a iceberg, and part of it that is unconscious. So I break it down into 2 categories. there's primary or fundamental shame, which is below the surface. And that is it's mostly unconscious, it's mostly disassociated. It means we don't remember it. It's what we despise about ourselves as a whole person. I am bad. No one will ever love me. It's the story we say about why we are so bad or broken. It's the self-loathing inside and out. It's intolerable. So if we look at the pyramid, and I'm getting ahead of myself, we got attachment trauma, we got shame. Every time you go up, you're trying to find a way to get rid of that part that hurts you the most. So you have to somehow get rid of it. Secondary shame is what we know. Every person who is an SLD knows this. They might not admit it in public, but they don't have good self-esteem because they're only loved by what they do and how long they can do things for others. But there's something about them that makes them feel fundamentally not worthy because they keep being hurt or they disappoint people. So secondary shame is what we have become. It's what we have not become. It's what we can't be or do, or the shame that we can tolerate. This is the stuff that every one of us carries. We all carry some level of shame, and I don't necessarily think a little bit of it is bad. I think it's part of the human condition. Again, this is a new slide. Any slide that's new, you can just email me, and I'll send it to you. Again, the primary shame is hard to get to. It's really hard to wrap your arms around something that is actually created in your childhood that you've tried, your brain has just made it inaccessible. Any questions about shame or core shame? Yes?
So basically the attachment trauma happens and then the byproduct is the shame.
Exactly.
And then the shame is manifested and made bigger because of our thinking over time and we keep replaying that?
No, you obviously, do you have a strong cognitive behavioral background? No. Okay, but you should. Actually, that's good because are you in the mental health field? No. But if you were, you would be a really good CBT therapist because CBT therapists actually do therapy based upon how we think and our thoughts are our feelings. So you're really connected to that. And it's deeper and more complicated than that. And yes, it has to do with how we think and how we process it. But I'm going to move forward in the explanation. So hold on to your explanation until we get the question until we get to the end, because one leads to the other, and the inability to solve one leads to the next. So attachment trauma we can't solve. That results in core shame. Core shame is so bad we can't think about it, but that shame we can think about haunts us. That shame brings us to this feeling of deep emptiness, loneliness, not feeling loved, yearning to be loved, not feeling valuable. It is a feeling of loneliness that could only go away when someone loves you. And the only person that is going to love you when you have SLDD, because the human magnet syndrome is almost 100% accurate for relationships created by romantic chemistry. There's all sorts of exceptions, like if you were pregnant at 18 and your parents kind of forced you to marry someone and it was just, or you come from a culture where your spouses are chosen for you. Loneliness is a scourge. It is an absolutely painful experience that goes away when you're in a relationship. Now, you can feel lonely in a relationship, but pathological loneliness is something that happens when, now I'm going to ask you for people, so this is a trick question because no one's going to really know what you mean. Who here either knows someone or is someone or has worked with someone who is an SLD that in between a relationship felt deep despair and loneliness that was so painful that brought them back to something that was absolutely crazy and insane because the pain was just too bad. That loneliness almost always happens. When I created this term, the internet caught on fire, at least my part of the internet. People just said, oh my God, this explains exactly how I feel. Comes from attachment trauma, shame, and loneliness. It's painful. It's suffering. I can remember, it's funny, I have this TV show that there's something about, I absolutely love the TV show The Jeffersons. I just love that show. And I remember when I was, right after the divorce of my son's mom, my first wife, I would come home and I couldn't fall asleep. And The Jeffersons were always on at the time I was asleep, and I'd put it on and I would fall asleep. And I needed background noise to keep me from feeling lonely. I always had music on. I always had the TV on. By the way, you're going to think I'm crazy. I can only fall asleep when I have something, I'm listening to something. And Comcast has this thing where you can get all your TV choices on your phone. And there are, I think, 14 seasons of The Jeffersons. And I have gone through them. Now I listen to it not because I'm lonely, because I just think I love that show, and it just makes me, I know it so well, I don't have to listen to it. It just keeps me from thinking, but I'm not lonely, I just can't stop my thinking. That's another problem, and I'm not here to talk about that. Loneliness is painful. So, attachment trauma, primary shame, secondary shame, loneliness. What are you going to do about the loneliness? You got to do something about it. I know that I got on Match.com. I developed an addiction, which I don't really want to talk about today, but I did. But I say that because, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, is that addictions are connected to addictions. Self-medicating is connected to self-medicating. So my loneliness was so horrible, I found Match.com. All of a sudden, I found power. I found all kind of this wave to escape. And so I guess I am telling you a little bit about it. I'm 40 years old, and I'm starting to feel good looking. I never really thought I was good looking or smart until I hit 40. True story. I was picked on and horrible self-esteem. I had terrible parents. Sorry, it's the truth. So now I'm like, tall and handsome. All these girls are responding, and it's like a kid in a candy store. In fact, when my wife first met me, she goes, "What?" She goes, "If it wasn't for your profile and your picture, is that name you have?" I go, "Well, it's like I always had this marketing advertising side in me. You got to catch someone's attention. So it's a good start." And so I got lost in it, and I hadn't yet figured out this codependency thing. But it was my way of dealing with the loneliness, because I was so lonely. I couldn't wait till I got home. I couldn't wait till I went on one of sometimes 3 dates. I did 3 dates on one Saturday. It was horrible. It was horrible. And of course, I was trying to find the needle in the haystack, that one perfect woman. But the problem is she wasn't there because I was broken inside. And I kept attracting the same type of person. And then I eventually met my second wife. So the loneliness turns into an addiction. SLDD is an addiction. And you have to understand it, because it explains why it is so hard to stop. I piss off a lot of intellectuals and a lot of people have sold millions of books, but codependency therapy doesn't work, and because the problem is the attachment trauma, the core shame, the loneliness, and someone is using cognitive behavioral therapy, or just say no, or just this is the problem with self-esteem, or just pray, or whatever, and prayer and all that stuff is good, but it doesn't solve deep psychological problems. Prayer will lead you to healing the deep psychological problems. That's my opinion. I'm not a religious person, but so that's about as much as you'll get from me. Maybe you'll get a little bit more later. But so it's an addiction. The pathological loneliness is solved by the person. And of course, every relationship starts off with a bang. In fact, there's a name for it. It's called limerence. It's a term that is human. It is actually, we are wired that way. I think that when someone falls in love, and unfortunately I'm jaded by too much information, they're on drugs. Because our brain, actually, even healthy people, it's a whole new set of chemicals and hormones. I mean, we can't eat or sleep, and we want to be with them, and we just remember kissing them. It's just crazy stuff. And it's fun too, especially if it leads to a healthy relationship. But the person who is an SLD, it's limerence on crack. It is intense, it's deep, and they lose themselves. Your loneliness is so severe, you need something to take it away. And you meet your Prince Charming, that man, that woman, that just is, because, the human magnet syndrome says you're codependent and you fall in love with people that'll hurt you. Actually, that's kind of the title, but it doesn't work that way. You fall in love with people that you believe will take care of you. It's a projection, it's a fantasy. As my dad said, you fall in love with your soulmate, and invariably they become your cellmate. So let me tell you about my narcissistic dad, who I'm still pissed off at, and he's dead. So I'm going to need some therapy. I just need some more time before I'm serious. He's been dead 2 years, and I'm okay with it, by the way. I have no guilt or shame. But in a couple years from now, I'm going to have to work it out. I learned this stuff because of my own craziness, my own crazy family. My dad was the quintessential narcissist, textbook poster child narcissist. He was really never interested in anything I did, and I had to beg for his attention. And all of a sudden, when he found out I was writing a book, he was interested, because now we had a son who was an author, but not really interested. And then I said, Dad, I have you a part of the book. I quoted that saying you said. Remember that saying, when you're a soulmate, it turns into a cellmate? He goes, yeah, that's mine. And he laughed. I said, well, it's in the book. And he goes, oh, really? When's the book coming out? And he was interested. And the day I got the book published, because I had not really made a lot of progress with my dad yet, because I was still trying to get his attention still. And I brought him a copy of the book thinking that, none of my family read it. True story. He bookmarked it, he highlighted it, and everyone that would come in, he would show the book, and he would show the page that had his quote. I'm much better. I've had a lot of therapy. I can talk about it. This is an addiction. Seeking someone to numb the pain, to distract you, a fantasy that can't ever happen. The pursuit of a relationship drives the addiction, and the only natural person is going to be a narcissist. So here's a song that almost got no airplay, and there's so many songs about codependency. It's like, especially, I don't like country music, but oh my God, it's like 2/3 of country music is about codependency. Half of the songs are about codependency. Even the songs that don't mean to be about codependency, that are about love. These young kids are writing music, it's about codependency. Ugh. I love this song, listen to the lyrics.
I don't buy your true life stories, 'cause I've seen the way you lie. But I don't mind the things you tell me, because I know we'll say anything to get by. But when we're together, somehow I feel better. My disease always tricks me. I believe you can fix me. You're insane. I love the drama. Tell the truth, you love it too. I know you. Reason strikes, we fight and break up. 'Cause to withdraw. You consume every thought, but if you call me, I will tell you to fuck off. I need
I changed the
you,
words.
I need you like a drug. I need you, I need you like a. I need you, I need you like a drug. I need you like a.
And then it turns into a really good rock song, but I'm not here to play rock and roll for you. Okay. But it won't work, because unless the residential does the whole attachment trauma, core shame, she'll get out, she'll go, I feel better, and then next thing you know, she'll think about her boyfriend, and it's like the alcoholic who goes to treatment, who doesn't really want to go to treatment, and just does his time or her time. They get out, they smell alcohol, and bam, they're drinking. These are 11 symptoms of any addiction. So I'm a certified addictions person, so I know addictions a little bit. It's an addiction if it's compulsive behavior. Codependence, SLDs are compulsive. They're continuing despite consequences. Losses, tons of losses, jobs, children, self-esteem, failed efforts of trying to stop, loss of time, inability to fulfill self-care obligations. I added that. Normally it's just inability to fulfill obligations, because codependents are really good at fulfilling obligations, just not for themselves. Ongoing desire or effort to limit their behavior. Preoccupation, can't get it out of your head. Escalation, over time it gets worse. Severe mood changes around the drug, and withdrawal. So it fits all the symptoms. I promise you, if you don't think I'm right, I want you to think of a codependent and say, do an experiment. And of course, they won't do it. I said, I want you to just as an experiment, I want you to leave your narcissist boyfriend for a week. Of course, they're going to say, are you crazy? But if they did, you would see them to have physical, emotional, and psychological changes. It's very noticeable if you're looking for it. So there are psychological, social, brain, neurological reasons for all this stuff. I am here to talk about just the human magnet syndrome. SLDD takes this normal limerence and it adds gasoline to the fire. This compulsion to distract, this self-medication, drives this horrible disorder. And it's horrible only to, I mean, you don't know how horrible it is unless you're the SLD. Because SLDs are famous for, and we're going to take a break in 2 minutes, are famous for hiding everything. Let me see something. I'm going to take a break right here because I don't want to rush this. So guys, let's take a real 10-minute break. Not